Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode in our podcast series, Are We All Listening? Today, I am very honored to be joined by Masengesho Mirimo and Mathias Rukira, the directors of Tomorrow Vijana, to talk about refugee leadership in southwest Uganda and beyond. Cohere has partnered with Tomorrow Vijana for many years, over 12 years now, that our two organizations have been working together. And Tomorrow Vijana has been one of the flagship refugee-led organizations, pioneering new approaches and set an example to not just refugee leaders around Africa, but also to the aid sector as a whole, as to how community-led and community-owned initiatives can be more appropriate and more inclusive to the most marginalized in refugee contexts. So thank you so much both for joining and for being part of this podcast.
Thank you so much, Edmund, and our dear listeners. Mathias Rukira by names. I'm a refugee from DR Congo. I have been in Uganda for 14 years now, and I'm one of the leaders of Tomorrow Vijana. I pass it to my colleague.
Hello everyone, I'm by name Masengesho Mirimo. I also serve in Tomorrow Vijana. I'm a refugee for 13 years in Uganda. I'm a resident in Rwanda refugee settlement.
So one of the things that you are both often advocating on whenever you're in Rwanda refugee settlement, but also beyond within Uganda and even in international discussions, has always been around shifting decision-making, shifting power to refugee leaders within the humanitarian sector, but also within the refugee response more broadly. There's definitely been some progress in that area over the 12, 13 years that you've been working at Tomorrow Vijana. But one of the challenges that keeps coming up, which seems to be quite persistent and doesn't seem to be changing fast enough, is this challenge that refugee leaders will always have limitations in how much interventions or activities or ideas can be owned by the community when refugees themselves have reduced rights. And one of the things I hear you talking about a lot is that people in Rwanda, refugees in Rwanda, are really embedding their roots in many ways in the community, the refugee community, those who were displaced mainly from Congo around the same time as you, having been there now for well over a decade. And yet it's difficult to really invest when rights that are taken for granted by most other people around the world, such as the right to have control over the land and the space that you're occupying, or the right to have real freedom of movement, real freedom to work, and even freedom to become politically engaged, to become citizens of that country, are reduced for your community. Can you talk a bit about your perspectives on that challenge, what you're doing about it, but also why you think this challenge is persisting?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I do believe with the time we have spent in the foreign country, I'm not calling it a foreign, but the hosting country, we can first encourage all the countries worldwide which are having this, the members of the United Nations, which are having this willingness of giving a temporary residence to the refugees from different corners of the world, including refugees from DR Congo who are living in Uganda. There are so many. The time that we have spent here, I may say our experience may really be not enough, but we have experience on issues related to what are the refugee, coping from the communities, what are the refugees coping from other NGOs, and especially when we look at the integration, because when you look at someone who has spent more than 10 years, someone has spent a decade in the hosting country, you find that you are building a certain strong relationship with people that you have there, and it makes you try to to elaborate more connections with not only international but with the local communities, because when you look at the integration, we find that we are really building this strong foundation, strong collaboration with natives, with local communities, and it is somehow making someone coming up with what's next. Of course, after having spent 10 years, you are looking at maybe becoming a foreign, maybe becoming a citizen, maybe acquiring something that will make you also feel like other communities. Because if you look at the life we are now leading, we are sharing almost the same thing. When we look at the market, we look at the business, we look at the education, you find there are even refugee children who have graduated from the CAP here, but still there is still that stigma of saying, how comes people, people are still having this in mind that one day, one time, people can opt for the solution of either being repatriated. But what we are learning from this, I think it is a great experience of understanding that something better should be done again in the way of integrating, let's say, the refugees in the hosting countries.
Thank you, Matthias. And Eric, maybe I could come to you with this next question to add on to that, because I know you within Tomorrow Vijana have spearheaded a lot of the initiatives around agriculture. And I think agriculture is an interesting way to look at the relationship that refugees have with the land in Ramwanja. Maybe you could talk about some of the barriers that prevent refugees from, in terms of the relationship they have with the land in comparison to most other populations.
Yeah, let me talk about the land, as you requested. I think answering to that question, I'm building my response to Mathias's view, where refugees have spent more than 10 years in Uganda, where they have built a connection, they have invested more of their resources on the land allocated to them when they were settled in the settlement. And you see the refugee in the role they are played in delivering the service or on the livelihood improvement. Refugees are no longer playing a role of service recipient, but they are now covering some gaps in responding to some livelihood challenges in the community. When I'm looking at this one, refugees, we are not owning the land. We don't have the full right of utilizing the land or developing the land, which is also becoming an obstacle to the refugee to progress, where we don't have like the idea of going back to Congo or having the chance of being resettled and reinterpreted in the hosting country. So this challenge brings an idea of the hosting country to rethink on how the humanitarian service is being delivered and implemented toward the refugees. Because we are no longer seeing ourselves as recipient of the service, but we are looking at ourselves as some people who are covering some gap of the challenge we are facing in the hosting countries.
Thank you. So maybe could you tell me more about that? Give me examples of how you're filling gaps and how, as a community, and how maybe what you're suggesting is that the host community in some ways or in many ways are benefiting from the presence of refugees in Ramwanja.
Yeah, if looking at how we are filling the gaps, if I'm to consider 10 years back how Ramwanja was, like we are looking at an underdevelopment village where refugee was settled, but by now the settlement is now becoming a city where the refugee now are running businesses and they are contributing on the taxes of the government. They are paying tax. Some of the refugees have developed some of the big enterprises which are responding to the need of the host community and the refugee themselves. Like for instance, we are having a refugee-heavy livestock farming, where in the area we are living, you can see the big enterprise of livestock is owned by refugees, which is a need from the community when it comes to meat consumption. We are having some refugee having veterinary workshops, which is treating animals from the host community and also refugee community. We are having refugee having training centers, which is hosting national and the refugees in the same center. The knowledge is shared equally from the host and the refugee setting. But from the knowledge we are giving to the refugees, they are having a limitation in implementing what the knowledge when it comes now to expansion of the skill. Like you see refugees having the capacity of establishing an enterprise to create job for our fellow refugees, but the space allocated to the person is having a limitation of doing development on that land. Those are some of the gaps I'm saying I feel.
So what are some of the limitations on developing that land? Why can't they develop that land?
Yeah, looking at not developing the land, we don't have ownership of the land. So I can do my development initiative on the land, but anytime OPM can say, we are shifting you to another zone. So whatever investment invested on the land, it is a total loss on the side of the refugee, because we don't own the land. We are only owning what is developed, the investment on the land, which when we are shifted, it is not compensated. So the investment, we are putting some of the limitation in the investment because we don't own the land. Anytime we can lose the properties on the land. I think Mathias can add there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also building on my colleague's submission, we are also looking at the growth of refugees. I mean, the land is not increasing, but refugees keep on coming and they keep on producing, which is, of course, pushing the refugees to use now the collaboration that we have with the host communities to hire lands for some time in the host community, which is really not permanent, but of course it's also bringing the idea of trying to use like regenerative agriculture, where you find refugees are trying to bring more innovation on the land, but still there is that stigma of saying, how can we do too much investment on this land, yet one day, one time we can wake up and something changes. So it is really something that is making refugees not expanding themselves in terms of investing on the soil of Uganda.
Thanks. And the irony is that the government of Uganda is investing huge amounts in building a new paved road that reaches all the way to Ramwanja, which in rural Uganda is increasingly common, but is still rare to find such a good quality road. So the government recognizes the value of the area commercially. Ramwanja, is partially now a municipal area, and yet the recognition of the investment the refugees are putting in or could put in is still reduced. One of the things I want to pick up there in what you shared, Mathias, about regenerative agriculture. This is a phrase that has been around for a number of decades, but I've noticed in recent years that there are more and more programs from the aid sector, from international donors and NGOs coming to places like Ramwanja and offering to support regenerative agriculture. The premise seems to be that refugee communities have a relationship with the land, and that refugees need to be encouraged to have a sustainable relationship with the land. There are investments coming to support initiatives that are sustainable in terms of agriculture, that are renewable and regenerative in terms of the soil health, diversification of crops, and nutrition. And one of my concerns is that a lot of these initiatives focus on fairly short-term to mid-term outcomes for refugee communities without really picking apart and exposing the underlying challenges of a system that deny rights to refugees to really belong to that land. Could you have any thoughts on that challenge?
If you can look at the challenges that refugees may say are facing in regard to the land, I can look at the high percentage of refugees who are in southwestern Uganda are from an agriculture background. So now the great challenge is that people are willing to develop, people are willing to expand themselves in terms of agriculture, because you understand that the land becomes insufficient when we look at the need. People who need the land are so many, but the land is limited. And this is of course, where there is a challenge, people are trying to find a way of overcoming it. That's why they are also, when we are looking at the social integration, you find they are trying to use the host community to see whether they can cover that gap of insufficient land. But there is also, we can look at this free access on even the land that people are getting from the host community. You find that at first it was hard. It was hard for them to access, but with the time people have spent, now they are trying to understand that we can both share, but for some time. But you find that even the ones that are getting in the host community, you need to protect, you need to, it requires a lot, which means if land could be sufficient in the settlement, it could make even these refugees to also expand or to explore themselves. But when it comes with this mindset of saying someone is a refugee, so it is denying you for some, for some right, when, if I can say, it is denying you for some connections, and it is also bringing some kind of underestimating someone, however much good you are contributing. But when people have in mind that these people are refugees, they are building it in the way that they are people who are here but who are going back. And psychologically, there is how this traumatizes refugees from expanding themselves, from developing themselves. Yes, the land is the side of the host community, but it's not all refugees who can access the land based on, I'm not saying that there is a misunderstanding, but when it comes with this mindset of saying, these are foreigners, these are visitors, these are not here to stay. So some people will reserve themselves, though they are from agriculture background, but they fail to access this land which is available and which is enough from the host community. So I mean, in the settlement, the land is limited, yet the population is from an agriculture background. That's one of the challenges. I think maybe my colleague has others. He can as well highlight some.
Yeah, I think on the challenge of the land, the big challenge we are facing is ownership, not only in the settlement, but also in the hosting community. Because, as Mathias have said, the community, refugee community is growing, but the land is not growing. And still the government is not expanding the land, and there is no revision of the policy to allow refugee to own land, either in the settlement or in outside the settlement in the hosting community. Because if I can look at the economic growth in the refugee setting, some refugees are having the capacity of buying land, but they cannot utilize the resource they have gained in the settlement to own a land in host community, because the government does not allow the ownership of a land to refugees. And some of the refugees who are owning the land, they are owning the land in the names of friends, which exposes them in the future risk in case the friendship is like ending. The person can turn against the person, the refugee will lose the land. That's the big challenge. So here we are pulling up on the government maybe to rethink how they can fix the policy of land ownership to the foreigners, especially refugees who are here for. We are not we are not here to die refugees. Some are growing to be integrated in the hosting community. Some are growing to be resettled. Some are thinking to go back to home. But if I can look to the experience, someone spending more than 20 years in a refugee city, I think that person has no idea of going back to the origin country because of the friend they have created in the hosting community, the connection they have made in the hosting community. Those are some of the challenges we are facing when it comes to the land.
You shared one of the strategies that refugees currently use to secure land a bit more than the very whimsical situation they find themselves in with land being allocated by the Office of the Prime Minister. when you mentioned that some refugees would buy land in the name of one of their friends, maybe a Ugandan friend. What other strategies, and I know that you as refugee leaders have had to experiment with different approaches, what other strategies do refugees use to secure land or to use land that they can at least invest in a little bit more?
Another strategy refugees are using to own land, they are owning it through companies. You like, for the company does not belong to a person, that's a company recognized by the government. But still, when we are looking at the mindset of the community, as long as there is no hand of the government sensitizing people about refugee owning something, either you are owning the land through a company, still the mindset of Uganda, they will know this person is a refugee. He owns a company, now he's buying our land. But if the government can also push the ownership of some, like to revise the policy allowing a refugee to own land at a certain extent, the community, the hosting community can understand these people allowed. Though we can use company or personal identity to own the land, but still we need the hand of the government to raise awareness of land ownership. Thank you.
And I guess that company still has to be owned over 50% by Ugandans, is that right?
Ugandans, yes.
Yeah, and this one is, I do believe that the land and people, they all belong to the governments, but there should be at least some revision. And if this can reach out to the big authorities, I think, or the decision makers, it is far better if they can try to adjust. I know it takes time, but when we look at where people have spent for more than a decade, I think the government should have some thick on back of their mind that at least let's try to understand, let's try to analyze, because all in all, refugees are working on the economy of the country. Once we develop, once we grow, I think it is still the country that is benefiting, because I do believe most of refugees who are in Rwanda, their investment, the high percentage, their investment remains on the hosting country, and the government should really look at that properly.
From your experience, do you think there's any potential for the government to be more open-minded and adjust policies around, for example, refugees owning land?
And I think the government can play a big role in like changing the policy, because the only challenge I'm seeing, when they were settling refugee, they were considering them like temporary resident in the area. But if they can look at the years they have hosted refugees, we are no longer considered like temporary actors in the settlement. And now we are now looking at becoming the long-term actors vis-a-vis the contribution we have done, the years we have done in Uganda. We have spent in Uganda, but now the government should not look at refugee as temporary resident in the refugee camp. So with that thought changing, I think the government can rethink on how to change on the policy.
And in Rwanda, when you've been granted access to land by the Office of the Prime Minister, or space to put up your offices, or football pitches or schools or whatever it is, what strategies have you used to build those productive relationships with the local government?
The strategy we used to build the collaboration, the partnership with the local governments. Of course, I say it is through starting small enterprises, like small associations that we started. For instance, Tomorrow Vijana has been in existence for 14 years, where we have all the documentations from the government, and it is also employing both refugees and nationals, and who are all taxpayers. So you find that it is a local organization that was initiated by refugees, but it is also influencing the natives to pay local taxes to the government. And I think we can be one of the voices in advocating for this, and the government may understand that at least these people are contributing to the statutory of the government, and they are also working with some nationals, Ugandans, who are, of course, doing brilliant work with Tomorrow Vijana. But it is one way of understanding that there is this collaboration, there is this cooperation, though having the status of refugees, but still we have built this strong relationship, because if you look at the district, if you look at the national level, when we go there as a refugee-led organization, we talk as partners. We are not talking as foreigners and natives. So we are having that collaboration. Yeah, and this is not only in Ramwanja, because we have also experience. If we look at other organizations, the other side of the country, you'd find there is a great impact that they are doing, working with natives and refugees. And it is really showing that at least something is being done on ground, and we have to encourage the continuity of these wonderful works that are being done by refugees in Uganda.
Is there space for any further collaboration with other refugee leaders in different parts of Uganda, maybe in West Nile or in Kampala, who have similar kinds of productive and conducive relationships with the local government that you have, to come together and pitch a very similar message, but at the national level?
Yes, there is that collaboration that we have built at the other side of the country, because if we can look at Naki Valley, we have some collaboration that we have. We established some collaboration with some colleagues from Naki Valley. We have also some colleagues in Kampala, like the Uganda Reload. We have some collaboration with them, but you can look also the other side of MVP, BDBD. There are some refugee-led organizations, and we normally we discuss issues related to supporting communities. And when we are supporting communities, we are not only looking at refugees, but we are also supporting the host community, moving with the cement sate that the government is promoting. So though a refugee-led organization is having funds, it is looking at intervening in both refugees and national. Let me take the example of Tomorrow Vijana. We have 70% of the refugees and 30% of the nationals who are also occupying the strategic positions to make the organization grow. We are looking at their expertise, and it is really supporting the organization. I also encourage other organizations which are doing the same, because I look at big organizations in Kampala. If I can mention like Yarip, they are doing great. I can mention like like Bondeko and other like ICANN South Sudan. These are refugees who are trying to do marvelous work. I look at Siota in Jangwali. They have both refugees and nationals, but we really need to come up together and we build a strong voice. Of course, to encourage what I know on this podcast, I do believe that the other side of the country, our colleagues are having the same voice, are having the same idea on how we can get this great integration. For us, we are looking at it like a great integration being now realized in the way that a refugee will feel like whichever intervention we are doing, it is there consistently, and it's not there to be shaken by any other, something like any other government threat, or someone feel like we are here but we are not here. So we really need to get this sort of well done and clear through the government.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I visited Changwali earlier this year, and two of the largest refugee-led organizations there, who have also been operating for, in some cases, even more years than Tomorrow Vijana, have just this year been told by the Office of the Prime Minister that they need to start paying rent on the land that they've got, because they appear to be making a lot of money, whereas in fact most of their revenue is coming from parents who are paying school fees. And this is an example of a counterproductive approach to hosting refugees that are really investing, and then when it appears that they're doing well, coming and trying to get a cut from that. But actually it's a similar story, because of their long-term relationship with the local government, they do their best to lobby, appeal, to look for other alternatives, which usually succeed. And what I've learned a lot from Tomorrow Vijana and as Cohere, we've never been very good at liaising with the local government or the Office of the Prime Minister, the OPM in each settlement. The OPM staff seem to rotate, as far as I can see, seems to rotate relatively often. And we just don't invest the time in building a relationship with them. And as such, they can be suspicious of Cohere and think, why aren't you, as Cohere, coming and visiting us and sharing more about the work that you're doing? And many refugee-led organizations like yourselves always advising us to be more open-minded in the way that we deal with the government. And the story you just shared about Chimpango just goes to show that if you keep the local government on side and negotiate a relationship that works for both parties, then you can actually achieve more than someone like Cohere, who keeps them at arm's length and just does the minimum reporting and compliance that we have to do. And that's a concern, I think, for the aid sector as a whole, is that it seems to be much easier to come in with, in some cases, millions of dollars, as have been coming into Uganda around regenerative agriculture for refugee communities, and to discard the potential and the opportunities that could be there in lobbying and advocating for policy change, but instead to look at quite simplified outcomes. You know, it's easier to design a program that, say, in 3 to 5 years is going to create 100,000 jobs in regenerative agriculture than it is to say within 3 or 4 years we want to change the policy for hosting refugees in Uganda so that refugees have more secure access to land, potentially can even own land, can at least invest safely or use land as collateral for investment. But instead, a lot of funding comes in to achieve these short-term outcome goals. And one of my concerns is that actually by doing that, it implicitly endorses the status quo, because not only do these flows of funding sort of seem to ignore the limitations of the rights that refugees have, but of course we know in one way or another the flows of funds, you know, there's leakage throughout the system that do end up supporting, you know, going to the authorities in one way or another. So there's an incentive to sustain the status quo. And from hearing what you're saying, if refugee leaders had more agency and were supported to do what they really wanted to do, they might instead come together, lobby for change for these policies at the national level, and perhaps have higher success, and actually use that aid funding in a far more appropriate way than is currently the case, where the outcomes are designed by people who aren't even from a refugee community and don't experience that exclusion and limitation of rights. What would you say to donors who are coming in with sometimes fairly restricted funding for outcomes to do with regenerative agriculture or any other outcomes that are defined by someone from outside the community? How would you like some of this humanitarian funding to look different?
I'm looking at the donor now being flexible, giving the money which can allow the implementing partner or the RLOs to invest in development activity which can sustain the activity of the organization and also give back to the community. Because we have been implementing projects where it is only targeting to respond to specific challenges. In case there is another problem arising within the implementation, you can't channel the money to the problem which has arisen. But if the money could be, the funding allocated is flexible or unrestricted, there is a flexibility of responding to the need of the community without obstacles in the implementation. So we are calling to the donor to open the grant and be flexible and unrestricted so that the community can act for long-term intervention beyond the donor timeline.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for donors to understand this, because if someone comes up with this great idea to create, let's say, 100,000 jobs, and in the process to invest in regenerative agriculture that can regenerate the land and can safeguard the relationship between humans and the planet for generations to come. You know, it sounds like an infallible idea. It sounds like something that no one could argue with. And this is why this becomes such a blockage to the humanitarian sector, because it sounds so great that everyone wants to get behind it and everyone gets excited about it and people put millions of dollars into it, whereas actually it isn't perfect. It doesn't tell the whole story. It leaves out a lot of the realities faced by refugees, that while one vision for change might sound great and sound difficult to argue with, it's undermined by the fact that refugee communities have reduced agency or choice over the type of a future that they want to see. It's been defined for them by someone else, and that in and of itself contradicts the whole concept of that humanitarianism, which is to be inclusive to the most marginalized, because that level of inclusion is prevented or cut short by the fact that refugee leaders themselves don't really get a meaningful say in the broader spectrum of change that could apply to their community.
Yeah, I agree with you, and we understand the fact that donor cannot believe on what we are saying when it comes to unrestricted funding to some of the activities, because we are looking at the experience where we are having some community member who have their own initiative without donor funding, and they are creating jobs for people. Now we are looking at, like we have received several millions and millions, but that the money was channeled in responding to some needs. After beyond the funding, you see the community is going back to the actual situation. So we were looking at if donor can give the flexibility to the RLO, responding to the opportunity which can create job for long term for the fellow refugees. The funding will not only serve the organization, but will give back to the community for long term. Not only coming, you engage people for 12 months, after the contract, the staff are laid out, the community is going back to the initial situation, which is not responding correctly to the need. Yet we are seeing where the need is needed in the community, which we are holding for the donor to give unrestricted funding to allow the organization, INGO, RLOs to respond to the actual problem in the community. That's my call.
Yeah, I think we have been around and have been experiencing some unrestricted vis-a-vis to the restricted implementation in the camp. But I do believe the donor will feel so proud to find that in 5 years back, you gave an unrestricted funding, but you find the community, there are some signs of the project that you funded 5 years back. And we can only look at encouraging donors, of course, encouraging these well-wishers or any other donor who feels like it is so much interested in funding the unrestriction. I think if I can say, if we are still talking about the 14 years back that Tomorrow Vijana has been existing, it is because of the unrestricted funding that we got from Cohere. And now 14 years, we're still talking about that. So this is a great example that we can give to other donors. You find that something has been given sometimes back, but still people are still talking about it. And it would really make a great impact. And it's also encouraging the donor to see what next. When you find that in 10 years you supported the person, but you find the support is still there. And that's even what brought us to the renovation of the building, of course, because it was still there. It was established 10 years back, but it was still there. So we can encourage other donors, other funders, when they are to release like this support, they should really focus on the unrestriction, because you find that when we are, I do believe we'll be talking about the localization, but when you look at the organization receiving this donation and uses it for some good years, yet it was only, let's say, a one-time funding, but you find it even after some good years, it's also encouraging, and it gives another idea of what's next to this partner or to this organization.
Yeah, sorry, if I can add a bit to what Matthias is from saying. I'm looking at the scenario where we can get a project with a partner, and when they're doing the assessment, they're seeing like an organization is having a challenge with maybe staff equipment like computer, tablet. Then in the project, we include the laptop, tablet. But when the project ends, the same partner collects the computer and goes back with them. Means it did not respond to the need of the RLO itself by taking back the computer, because we are going back to the initial situation where we were in the state of not having computers. You give us computer to do the implementation, but after the project, you take back the computer. Still, we are going back to the challenge. So we are calling to the unrestricted fund to cover some of these gaps for long-term sustainability.
And how has this affected your strategy as one of the more established and larger refugee-led organizations in Uganda? Because now you've had this cycle several times coming around that you seem to have a project that makes it appear that Tomorrow Vijana is growing. You have to recruit people, you have to procure equipment, and then the project ends and some of that has to now shrink down again, and that's frustrating. And I think you've been experiencing that in 2025 and 2026 in the wake of the US and other countries cutting their foreign assistance budgets. How has this now adapted the way you think about Tomorrow Vijana's future? Possibly, if I don't want to overuse the word growth, because there's this obsession with scaling, which is not always appropriate, but I know you also want to grow your influence. How have these factors and these experiences affected your thoughts about the future direction of the organization?
Yeah, the strategy now we are having for Tomorrow Vijana, now we are looking at now investing in enterprises that can give back to Tomorrow Vijana and also support to the community. Like we are having a piggery project which is supporting Tomorrow Vijana to implement some unfunded project to the community, and also sustaining the administration of the organization. Beyond that, we are also looking at doing a joint venture of other organizations who are having more capacity. If I can bring on board, we are partnering with Turaco to implement a poultry farming enterprise, which we know it will not only be a business for leaders of Tomorrow Vijana, but it is an income for the organization to respond to those unfunded projects. We are looking also at gaining experience from Turaco, if I can say, venturing of them will give us more of the responsible implementation. Like we are looking at the administration of the businesses, because before we're in the humanitarian, but with this shift, we are looking also at having the double generation response, responding to the community as a humanitarian and also covering the sustainability of Tomorrow Vijana through enterprises as business.
Yeah, maybe if I can add on that. Thank you, Rick. I'm looking at Tomorrow Vijana still having on board our beloved community, because we started the organization responding to the challenges. Of course, the organization grew because I do believe we talked of the organization which started with the aim of bridging the communication gap, but we ended up embracing livelihood, education, women empowerment, and also supporting children with the disability, that is education and inclusion. So as the organization grows, I think we are looking at venturing into more investments, but still having the community on the forefront of all implementation that we are having, because we need to know what have we gained, what have we earned from what we are doing, and what have we given back to this community, because the community is there with us, the community is standing with us, and we need to stand still to make sure we become a strong voice for this community. Because when we are discussing about issues related to the land, we are not looking at Tomorrow Vijana only, but we are looking at the entire community that is expecting from this voice of Tomorrow Vijana reaching the donor, reaching the government, reaching the decision makers. How can it change the unchangeable situation into something smooth, into something flexible that will help the entire community? Though we are venturing into enterprises, we are venturing into sustainable activities, but still we have our community on the forefront of each battle that we are carrying.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Donor funding from the global north is continuing to reduce. And if official reports are anything to go by, the economy in Uganda is growing. But I think from our own anecdotal experience, we can definitely see that the economy in southwest Uganda around Ramwanja is developing. More and more people are investing, and enterprises just seems to be growing. And I think your strategy makes a lot of sense, particularly given the history you've described of these cyclical projects that, if they keep reducing in size, just don't do anything for morale and makes planning for the future very difficult, which, given your name being Tomorrow Vijana or Tomorrow Youth, is important that you're able to plan for the future. So I think if I was to summarize what some of the messages I've heard from you today is, you've recognized that there has been a trend in localization. You've been able to share experiences of donors and other aid actors, NGOs who have partnered with you over the years. But what I'm hearing is that localization, not just getting funds to refugee-led organizations in one way or another, is not enough. In fact, not only is it not enough, but it could continue to be harmful if key elements are not brought into consideration, like the element that you shared about unrestricted funding, giving ownership to the community to really be able to invest in what the community wants over the long term. And you gave the example of the center you built in Chempango, which is still going strong 10 years later because it was funded with unrestricted funding. But you've also shed light on ways in which localization can be much more than just having control over humanitarian resources, but actually coming together to advocate for bigger issues to do with justice and dignity and agency, so that refugees can have rights that are enjoyed by most people around the world in terms of, for example, the access to land issue we're discussing. One of the pushback that some donors might come up with, or the devil's advocate argument, might be, it's all very well to just give unrestricted funding to an organization like Tomorrow Vijana, but how do we know that it will be used for what it should be used for? And that's when the aid sector will typically try and come in with more and more layers of bureaucracy, from requirements around the contract to pre-established results frameworks to fairly strict due diligence, accountability and compliance, and all of these things which bit by bit serve to undermine the ownership and the agency that you have over that humanitarian funding. And that's where I would answer a different way and say, no, in fact, if you just get to know Masengesho and Mathias and the work that they're doing, you don't need all of that. But you do have to invest in that relationship building, and that's Cohere, that's what we've done, where we have 2 full-time colleagues who are living in your community, Jenny and Michael, who you see all the time, probably several times a week, who are part of Cohere. We have also a location-based consultant, Haruma, who's also working for us part-time, who's part of Cohere as well. You two are very much part of Cohere because of our long-term history, and you're very candid with us. We have a trust-based relationship where you can tell us things straight, give us the much-needed advice that I was describing earlier. And as such, we don't need all that bureaucracy, and instead, the relationship we have can be responsive to your guidance, your advice, so that the decisions that related to the work that we're doing as Cohere can be made by those who are closest, who are most affected by the issues that we claim to be working on, as opposed to being made by people in headquarters in other parts of the world. I don't know if you have any final reflections on this, and do you agree with what I'm saying? Does that relationship work for you? And could you have any other suggestions for other partners who might want to come to Rwanda and support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it is also our great pleasure to find that Cohere has built this great foundation through having the direct staffs on ground when it comes at understanding the work that is being done by the grassroots organizations. I think this makes more sense when it comes to avoid some kind of people are not doing exactly what is supposed to be done. And there is enough time for them to evaluate, to understand, and also to learn from what people are doing so that they can be a voice for these grassroots partners to access some of the services, some of the supports, of course, that have already been delivered in, I may say, in Uganda, not only in Rwanda, but we have also been hearing from the other side of the country that partners have been directly supported by Cohere through this trust-based relationship that Cohere is bringing on board. And this could also be a voice to other partners or to other donors, either on the international or local level, to build from this. This would be like a role model for other partners to look at how best we can try to use this approach to reach out to people. Because what I know, any support that is being delivered is reaching the final targeted beneficiaries when we are looking at the approach that is being designed and that is being implemented by Cohere.
I think adding to what Mathias is saying and responding to the trust should start first from the source of the funding. So I'm looking at the calling up on the donor, also rethinking on the due diligence, because we are seeing some small RLO facing the challenge of meeting the compliance, though they can be having the flexible funding, but when we are looking at the compliance, some RLO cannot meet the compliance. So we are calling to the donor to build on the trust-based, not looking at the resource to meet their requirement, which is one of the obstacles. Some RLOs are also not meeting the donor requirement, but with the trust-based, it can open the door for those small RLO with fewer resources to meet the donor requirement over time.
Yeah, I think not just some RLOs, but often the leaders who are closest to the most marginalized, let's say leaders with disabilities, the elderly, maybe young women, they may be the most likely to struggle with the compliance and due diligence requirements that many donors have, which means that by design, the more marginalized leaders are excluded from the current system's opportunities, which is why I think what your advocacy is right to be promoting a more trust-based model, which does take investment, does take time, but what I think you're describing is that it can work. When we started our partnership with Tomorrow Vijana, Cohere and Tomorrow Vijana both had very little in the way of resources, but we were able to work together. We have our presence in Rwanda still, and with or without any funding, that can continue to be the case. I hope that as Cohere, we continue to learn from you and look forward to carry on our partnership for many, many years to come. And I think we can leave the podcast there just to say thank you both very much again for joining and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, we thank you very much, Edmund, for organizing this podcast. It has been great to have this. Thank you.